Welcome to episode 14 of Tales from a Disappearing City. Last episode had the first part of our chat with my good friend Brandon Spivey. That episode we discussed Brandon's growing up in Oldham and Macclesfield, Manchester, early punk scene, acid house, that sort of stuff. Brandon, for this episode, let's maybe just start off our chat. We're going to move more into the 90s, but let's maybe just start it off with talking a bit more about some of the political stuff you talked about. You talked about going to Germany, I believe, in the 80s and doing some political stuff. Do you want to discuss that?
In Macclesfield, we were the first organised squatters outside London. And we used to deal with ASS, Advisory Social Squatters. Through the network that we were involved in, we organised a squatters conference and we met an international squatters conference. And somebody came from Berlin and said, look, we've got some demonstrations coming up. And so I went to Berlin, a group of us did. There was an INM, the first IMF meeting, I think it was incredible. They were asking all sorts of rioters to go, and there was days of like demonstrations, protests. It was like the Black Bloc period, so we was into riot.
Do you want to explain what that is? Because a lot of people won't know what the Black Bloc is, what that means.
There was a movement called the Autonomous Movement, the Autonomists, and they were basically like autonomous. They weren't connected to the left. You know, they were anarchistic, anti-authoritarian. Somebody else might give you a different take on that, but that was, as an Englishman, that's your gist.
I know for you come up through, like you said, like your mum and dad were like union, they were Labour,
yeah.
But I know you sort of kind of rejected that in a way, or your politics did.
Yeah, I did, because my dad, when I was a kid, our house was used for local Labour Party polling. People at the council would come in our house, posters in the window, people coming to the house, very old-fashioned. And I looked at that, and my dad was a shop steward, and I looked at that and thought, well, Labour's not helping the working class in any way, shape or form. And that pushed me towards anarchism. And interestingly enough, in Britain, the Boys from the Black stuff is seen as a famous drama. And the guy who wrote it, basically, he said it was all written under Labour. So the Boys from the Black stuff, which is a significant cultural play of the period, was written under a Labour government. It wasn't written under Thatcher. Alan Bleasdale, so that's interesting. I can show you the clip of that. So, yeah, I was pushed towards anarchism, and my granddad was anti-war. My family were atheists. So, I come from a sort of radical background to some degree, yeah. So I was pushed into anarchism. It made sense. I remember a teacher at school trying to get me to read communist papers because he knew I was anti-authoritarian, and he used to fetch me in Pravda. And I thought, what's this fucking wank? And I feel exactly the same today about communist shit. For me, it's bullshit. And so basically I got into the anarchism and reading Freedom magazine. I used to be the contact on the back of Freedom magazine as a Macclesfield anarchist back in the early 80s, so yeah.
So you got the call from the Black Bloc to go to Germany, yeah?
Yeah, we did. First time I went, you went there, where'd you get your balaclava from? Do you take it with you, or do you go to the fucking shops?
Yeah, it's an important thing to know if you go to a riot, yeah. Where'd you get your balaclava from? What's your recommendation, Brandon?
We had all the gear. And what was funny was it was a fucking heavy do, so we had like newspapers up our arms because for the truncheons, and
was that the Morning Star, or was it what newspaper?
Anything to pack your clothes out at the time, And we wear groin protectors and gas masks, and you would take it seriously. Yeah, I saw some amazing riots. So the IMF was incredible. There was a ball on in the middle of Berlin. And we surrounded these fucking cars. There were people with tiaras on and evening gowns, and the cars were getting rocked up and side down, and all the windows getting smashed, and police cars getting wrecked, and banks getting wrecked. And I went to Berlin twice. I went to when Ronnie Reagan went. They were big riots. I think there was 8,000 of us massed up, Black Bloc, and fuck me, we wrecked the fucking city. And comically, by that time, I had the tape from Manchester, Mick Power's tape from Eastern Bloc. So I was on a riot in Berlin listening to Model 500. I had a fucking Walkman on, throwing bricks with a Walkman on. Because the police had gone, this shit it the police did. We just wrecked the banks. We was a big riot. So yeah, there's amazing times. I remember being in Kreuzberg, outside SO36 with like lots of riot cops, and SO36 opened its doors, so we were able to attack the police and fucking run inside SO36 and close the shutters so the police couldn't get in.
That was the club or bar, was it?
In Kreuzberg, it's still there to this day, and SO36. So that was a long time ago, but there was the amount of bricks on the floor, and the police did get a good hiding. They got a good beating. Yeah, they're famous riots, some of them. And Mark Reeder's film Berlin B movie, he actually shows clips of the riots. I was in some of them riots, so going to Berlin was a beauty. It's a hell of an experience for me, and it was good.
Yeah, this is pre-Berlin Wall, wasn't it, coming down? I'm always kind of a bit gutted because the first time I went to Berlin was a couple of years after it come down. So what was it like pre-wall coming down, Berlin 80s?
To be honest, it seemed really quiet. When you go there now, it's like a circus, whereas we stayed in Kreuzberg. I stayed on Adalbertstrasse twice. I went there for, I think, 6 weeks in total, or 5 weeks, I can't remember. We were scared of the police because they were picking on people, so we had to sort of hide a little bit. But Kreuzberg was really quiet. The wall was big. We used to go to the squatted land and have coffee and hang out. I remember being on the squatted land by the wall, by these like gypsy caravans, having a coffee around a fire. And there's this beautiful woman stripped naked, and she had a metal bath with a fire underneath it, and she was having a bath, So it was a really beautiful there was moments. And I remember one night I met this German guy who used to teach kids how to use scanners, police scanners, and me and him teamed up. We were good writers together. And I remember the Berlin Wall used to have these platforms you could walk up and almost see across on the other side. And I remember we were drinking beer and clouds of tear gas coming over. And it was really romantic, and there was something very atmospheric about Berlin. I think it's there now, but it's in very small amounts now. Yeah, it was quite a time. We went to some parties, and there was it was very different from what it is now. But yeah, it was. I'm glad I went. I really am glad I went, and I have an interest in George Grosz, so there was an interest there about the Dadaists.
Yeah, tell me about that, because I know you're a big fan of George Grosz, and yeah, like you said, that was a thing that really, when I was a kid, seeing the Dada stuff, that was the stuff that really blew my mind, as much as any of the punk sort of stuff. Just seeing all the mad sort of Dada stuff. Do you want to just talk about then? Yeah, but what about that and George Grosz? What's about all that sort of stuff that inspires you?
In a nutshell, in Macclesfield, I had a friend called Mark Scurru, who's passed away now. Mark, I used to do amphetamines with Mark, and he showed me these books by George Grosz when I was 17, and it blew. I opened, one was called Love Above All, and one was called The Day of Reckoning. One was about human relationships, another one was about economic relationships. And the images of George Grosz were so beautiful and grotesque, and I felt like it was like reading. Some people read books, big heavy books, and get some out of it. Well, seeing George Grosz's work was like reading a lot of books within 5 minutes. It was a real education. And then Grosz kind of opened my mind. It made me think a lot. And so I just got an interest in it. And, going to Berlin was like part of that, so I went for the riots, but I also I went to a private gallery. And I was about to steal some pictures, or maybe I don't mention that, but I didn't, because these people were so cool. They let us in this private gallery. It was wonderful. And how we tracked it down, I'll never know. But wanting to go to the streets where Grosz was a big deal, wanting to sort of get the atmosphere. And I'm very lucky because I actually own a few. I've got a signed Grosz litho, and I've got some signed Grosz books and things like that. So, the rebellion of Dadaism was just beautiful. The political stark messages of Dadaists were really, for me, were my education. And I would describe myself as being massively influenced by Dadaists, basically. Yeah, the Grosz and Otto Dix, for definite.
Berlin is home to a lot of that artwork. I mean, I still love Berlin to this day. I mean, yeah, again, it's like London. People say, oh, yeah, it's not as good as it used to be and all that. But there's still bits that are great. But then, yeah, if you go in some of the art galleries and check out some of the art, you know, there's some, you can see some beautiful old Dada art in Berlin. What about some of the sort of squats in UK? I know, like in previous episodes, I mean, we said at the start, I think I originally met you at Dead by Dawn in the 90s, but that was in a venue called the 121 Centre, which is like an anarchist centre in Railton Road in Brixton. I believe you used to go there in the 80s, didn't you? Do you want to tell us a bit about the 121 Centre, or basically even coming down to London and part of the sort of squat scene? Because we talked about Manchester, we talked about Berlin, so yeah, what about London?
Well, I will say quickly about the 121 Centre. There was a guy in Manchester called Phil. Phil was one of the people who set up 121. He was a really nice bloke who lived in Hume, basically, and he was an interesting bloke. But yeah, the 121 Centre, I used to go there, and it was really interesting. There were different collectives that used it. I can't remember when I first went, maybe 85, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was a great place. And I spent time on bail in Brixton for some. I was accused of some terrible crimes against police. So I was bailed to Brixton, and I spent quite a bit of time there on a curfew. But I was hanging around with people who were running the bookshop at the time, you know, 121, and it was like a mixed collective. There was a lesbian collective there, a women's collective. There was the anarchists. There was squatting advice. So the shop had different jobs at different times of the day. You know, loads of people looked after the building. And I remember Crowbar magazine. There was the magazine called Crowbar, which was really extreme. Have you heard of that, Neil?
No, that's a great name for an anarchist magazine. I want to see an issue of Crowbar. Do you have any?
No, I don't, but I'll tell you one issue that they did do, which when PC Blakelock got killed, on the front of the cover of Crowbar, the newspaper said he was hacked to death by hyenas. And on the Crowbar, it just had pictures of hyenas, and it had ha, 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 ha all over the front cover. So it was proper fucking extreme, and they were having to go back at the police. But so Crowbar was ran out of there, and I was involved sometimes in putting it together, you know, stapling it and folding it.
You had the Brixton riots in the early 80s, and like, you know, the police in Brixton weren't known for their tolerance. So how did they deal with the fact that they've got like an anarchist place in their midst, really, just around the corner? It's just around the corner from Brixton police station. Was there much like police presence around there, like giving them shit down the 121?
I do remember Brixton back then in what they call the front line, you know, Railton Road. You know that, you know what they called it, the front line. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Railton Road was the front line. They called it the front line.
But I remember when it was like, you felt like you were entering a free area. As a white fucking kid from Manchester, it was, I mean, I weren't too freaked out by it, and everyone were really friendly, and like, you know, but you were very aware of it could kick off at any moment. You know, and
I know it definitely changed. It's kind of weird when you walk down there now, and I do remember it from the 80s, from Railton Road. Yeah, it was. You had the Warrior pub down at one end, which was like, you know, that was a pretty scary pub to go into. And then Railton Road was the front line. Like you said, you didn't see any police really walking down Railton Road. No, it was like a separate zone of Brixton.
When I first came to London, it was for Stop the City demonstration. I think it was 84. So I hitchhiked down, and there was loads of people on the services all hitchhiking down for this demonstration, you know, this Stop the City. We arrived, there were a couple of us, and we arrived at, I think it was the Peace Centre. It was all shut up. So we got to London, and it was a big city for us, you know. I mean, Manchester's big, but fuck all compared to London. And we were only young, really. And I remember, like, we got to this place, and it was shut up, but the building was there, but it was derelict. And then we met these freaky people, and there was a fella came into the building. He had these wooden glasses on. They were made of wood, and there were no glass in them. And he had rubber bands on his ears. And they said to us, "Do you want to come and ride in our ambulance?" And we said, "Yeah, fuck it, why not?" You know what I mean? And so they were a gang from Pullens Estate, which was a big squatted estate. And they were really great fellas, a guy called Fibes and a really nice crew. I think they put us up at their place, which was normal then. You know, the squat scenes were very welcoming. And then we were taken to the ambulance station. So for me, because we had a squatted school in Macclesfield and various other things. But then to go to the ambulance station was just fantastic. It was a great building on the Old Kent Road, and it was a big place with, loads of bands played there, and that was a very welcoming place. And also, you could smell the brick dust there. There was the smell of the ambulance station, and I used to go there quite a bit over the years, and I saw bands like the Poison Girls, Omega Tribe. They used to have these incredible parties there. This is what amuses me about people saying about dance music, because there was whole scenes going on prior to the dance scene. I remember a poster for the ambulance station, and it said "Bop till you drop." There was a man holding a woman in his arms, and she collapsed. "Bop till you drop," and there was loads of really interesting independent parties and scenes, and within these buildings, so.
No, for sure. They were going on all through the 80s. I used to go to loads of them in London, and I actually, in Dataside, and I've written a bit about the warehouse parties before Acid House, like people saying they started in 87. They didn't. They were going on way before then, all sorts of sort of stuff. Could you tell us a bit about the Pullens as well? Because I know Howard talked about going to see some gigs at Pullens, at the Pullens place.
Pullens Estate, this is my memory of it, was a fantastic area. It was a big squatted area, and they used to have a communal building, if I remember rightly, a cafe and things, and it was all squatted. Some of the people were involved in organising the Stonehenge festivals. I remember coming away from there one day with like hundreds of posters to advertise Stonehenge Festival. So it pre-86, the Beanfield and all that stuff. It was just very, very wonderful place, really nice people. As I say, a guy called Fibes, who, I've not seen him for many, many years, but he was a wonderful guy and very friendly. And there was a very much, it was almost like the whole old school hippie, proper counterculture place.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think some of that doesn't get some sort of respect in a way, because it's almost like, you have the punk thing where it's all like, they hated all the hippies, and it's fair enough, man, but then you had all that, like you said, the counterculture, the Stonehenge sort of travellers. They were quite political, and all that really tied in through the 70s and the 80s, and like I said, they were tied in with the squats and all sorts of radical sort of culture. And it's a whole long story, but loads of the free parties were originally like all that sort of Stonehenge hippie sort of scene, and then they morphed into like your Spiral Tribes and all that sort of stuff. But like you said, all them sort of hippies, but they're kind of old hippies, but they're still pretty bloody radical. They're not just sitting around smoking dope and doing nothing, are they? They're organising, and they're on it with their politics.
Yeah, I think every new generation wants to think it's created something. They were the originators. And when I'm 56, so when you go back, I have respect for people going way back. And one thing, Neil, about 121, there was a guy who used to work at 121 called Miguel Garcia. And Miguel Garcia has written a book. He was an anarchist from Spain. He was an old man. I think he was imprisoned under Franco. Well, he was imprisoned under Franco, but Miguel Garcia used to work at 121. So these are the old Spanish anarchists from the 30s, were involved in London. And, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of really serious radical threads that are very powerful and strong, that were the backbone of a lot of these scenes. Even like ASS, Irish Social Squatters, there's some older people there. There's a lot of older generation who the younger people took the baton from them, whereas I think there's generations who claim they invented the baton, you know what I mean? And the roots of all these things I find fascinating.
So you come down to London. I think you told me about something about some place. Was it Hotel Bastardos? Am I saying that right?
Yeah. I was involved in the political stuff, I was involved in the campaign against police repression. I've been involved in the Army Asbestos campaign, the Hillsborough Justice, everything. I've done it all. I am an activist. And but then you had the party scene, and I used to know an older guy, and he took me to a place he lived there, it's called the Hotel Bastardos, and it was a fucking huge squat in a hotel. And it was like a scene from a film or...
What area was this in, Brandon? Do you remember where this actually was?
Area, because it was I can't remember, Neil. I only went there the once, but they had a fucking lift in there, right? And it was that fucked up. They had somebody in the lift, a lift man in the lift. Like that was his job, like his role. they'd take you up to whatever floor you wanted to, and every floor you got out on, there was like fucking people dealing drugs, people dressed up to the nines. It was a proper clubby sort of, very bohemian. It was one of the most amazing buildings I've ever been to, and it was on a load of different floors, and Hotel Bastardos, yeah.
I might have to Google this because, like, I'm not sure if this is real or you just dreamt this.
It's in my fantasy, I think
it might be. Yeah, it might be your fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I come to London. I went to Hotel Bastardos.
The ambulance station now, like I've seen some great websites about that. People telling the story on that. And I met a guy, a fantastic musician called Hoagie. Hoagie used to live at the ambulance station, and it really was quite a place. And also, there's a great photographer called Martin Goodacre who lives in Berlin now. And Martin used to live at the ambulance station. So what's nice is some of the histories of these places are being fetched into the sort of present day.
I lived right next to it for a point in the early 90s, but I think it was well shut by then. Do you know when it shut, the ambulance station? Or
no, I don't, but I can't remember when it shut. But yeah, still.
Oh, yeah, I was living in the Old Kent Road in the early 90s, but I think it wasn't active then. You started getting into maybe some other music. You started getting into the techno stuff. We talked before about you getting into Detroit-y stuff. I think you were saying to me as well, you used to go to some like clubs up north, like the Orbit. You used to regular the Orbit.
I lived in Leeds basically, and I was around. For example, I remember when LFO started, and I remember hearing the John Peel sessions of LFO. And I've done an interview with Jez. You should hear it if you get a chance. But there's a club called the Orbit that started in a few areas of Leeds, but it became a place called Austin. And it was a fantastic club, and it started early, but finished at like 2:00. And they used to get all the best sort of DJs and come over. And I saw an interview recently with CJ Bolland, and he said, "What's the best club in the world?" And he basically said Berghain, and then he said the Orbit, and then he said the Orbit, and then Berghain. He kept swinging like a pendulum because the Orbit was an incredible club, and the atmosphere was fantastic. And what was beautiful about that period, or what maybe was special to the Orbit, was nobody was self-conscious. You went in there and you fucking lost it. The music was incredible. John Berry from Eastern Bloc used to DJ there, Mark Turner, Nidge Walker, and they would play all the most fucked up music, all the R&S stuff, all the great records that were coming out. They had a back room, and all the lads who in the back room, you'd hear the most crazy Detroit and fucked up electronic stuff, all the Drexciya. It was great, it was a great club. So the Orbit, was there lots, enough, yeah.
Yeah, no, I always wanted to go to the Orbit. I never made it up to there. Like you said, it shut at 2, which was, kind of early back then when the raves started going all night. But yeah, was it actually in Leeds, or was it in a small village outside? Or
Morley, just on the outside of Leeds. Yeah, it's in Leeds, but it's just on the edge of the town, and it's quite a place. The music scene in Leeds was very good, very down to earth, basically, and really good people. And there was a music shop we used to buy our equipment from. I've done an interview with Jazz that covers a lot of ground there. About the Leeds scene, but yeah, the Orbit was quite special. It really was.
Okay, so all these years you've been listening to music, Brandon, and getting involved in all these sort of scenes and being a bit of a hooligan, if I'm to be honest.
Yeah.
But then you started to make music. Can you just tell a little bit about that? You started to make music and started to put it out.
We started putting some parties on in Leeds called Microdot, and it was a free party, and it was the most extreme techno that was being made. And every time we put one on, it was costing me like £100. We had a collective who ran it. And DIY from Nottingham would come and do the sound system. We used to hire their sound system. It was a really good party. And they have a bit of, people remember them very fondly. They were a big deal. But basically, I pulled away from the group just as it collapsed. And because every time we put one on, I realised I could buy a piece of music equipment. So I started getting equipment together. And when people go on about DJs, and my thing back then was music equipment. So what I was interested in was music production. And I was also interested in manufacturers. So when people rave on about DJs, I was like excited by people making equipment. And so I started buying synthesizers. I've had synthesizers since I was 15. My first synth was a Gen SX1000, MC202, which I went to 808 State, all that shit. And I started buying equipment, and I started making music, and I met up with a guy called Richie Anderson. My first record was on a label, Frank DeWolf's label. Frank DeWolf did a series, and I did an EP with him called Candyman on Two Thumbs. And I got shafted by one of the guys in the band. I'll never forgive him, me clown. And but then after that, I met with Richie Anderson, and we had only a small amount of gear, but we just started making music. I had a TB303, a MIDI verb, and I managed to get a desk together. And I'm not going to give names away, but I went to Nottingham to meet a man, and he showed me how to do a scam. So I managed to get loads of music equipment together. So I bought an Akai, etc. Yeah, Akai S950.
Yeah, you've always been into like the acid sort of stuff. Like, what is it about like acid music that you like? Or
I just like it because it's fucked up. But I like for example, breakcore and all that is too erratic. The beats. I like very repetitive music. And I like the modulation in acid, and I like the sound of the TB303. But I also like textures in sound. So I always like string sounds. I liked ethereal sounds. I like stuff that's tricked out. So yeah. So that was it really. I wanted to make music that I wasn't hearing. And some music was really fucking boring out there. We wanted to make something that wasn't.
I first met you down Dead by Dawn, and like. You're probably doing like live PA there with Richie, like playing some super fast mental acid. Yeah. That's probably what was going on, wasn't it?
150 BPM, Neil. It wasn't too bad.
Okay, well, I guess that's kind of seen as fast now, but like that was kind of slow back then as well. So what are your memories of Dead by Dawn, coming down to do Dead by Dawn?
It just fucked up, meeting Howard was fantastic. Meeting the crew, they're all really good people. I remember there was a blind guy who used to come. And I remember how he negotiated the building. I'll never know. He was blind. He had a stick. And I remember the televisions that Nomex had on, and there was all this colour coming out of this TV, and this blind guy was in front of it. And it looked like, when them Buddhist monks set themselves on fire. So there's this guy bathed in all this light, and it was like I was looking at this Buddhist monk on fire. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I had to look again. I'm totally clean by this stage, But it was intense. I knew the building, but the parties were brilliant because people were talking, discussing, the building, the different rooms. I remember Howard Slater, Flint, Michigan. There were some lads playing some jungle on the decks in the kitchen, and I'd never heard Clear by Cybertron. And Howard said, "You've never heard Clear by Cybertron? What the fuck's going on with you, man?" And he kicked these lads off the decks. He said, "Sorry, lads, you got your last record." He kicked these lads off the decks to play me fucking Clear by Cybertron. And,
amazing.
It was all good-natured. There's only Howard could charm his way through that. And I was hearing, I remember people playing Steam Train records. And I remember Nomex, all the crew. When DJ Freak came down, Dada 9 came over. Yeah, it was a good laugh. We had. And remember breakfast the morning after going out for breakfast. I remember you wearing a fur coat, and you looked fucking fantastic. You had this fur coat on with a big trim, and I remember just having a right good laugh. Yeah, good giggle.
Yeah, doesn't sound like the sort of thing I'd wear, Brandon. I'm normally shower. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, I remember, going out to the calf. I think it was on Acre Lane. We used to go to calf up on Acre Lane. You had a few sort of travels around that time as well, didn't you? Sort of just getting out and about.
I wanted to go to Chicago because it was the home of Acid House. And so I went to San Francisco first, my first trip to America, which I really enjoyed. And then I used to go to San Francisco a little bit. And then I started to go to Chicago. I met a girl there. And so I was going to Chicago a lot. And I was doing my best to go to parties in Chicago. And I had this thing about a pilgrimage, because of acid, because Acid House blew me away, but it was really hard. It was like I was trying to find clubs in Chicago, and everything I was finding was like high energy clubs or house clubs. And I've never been into house music, even to this day. I find house music boring. So going to clubs hoping they were going to play a bit of acid or something interesting. But then I met Delta 9, Dave Rogers. Dave, to this day, I consider him a friend of mine. He's a really good bloke. And I went to some parties with Dave, and that was a fucking mind-blowing. I went to a party in a school and the whole school was occupied. I remember listening to Plastic Man in a classroom on them little chairs, like with the arm on them, like Charlie Brown, and two decks set up on the teacher's desk and little stacks of speakers, and Richie Orton in the main room playing funk, and Lenny D, and although Kurt was there from Drop Bass Network. That's where I ended up on Drop Bass, because I met Kurt from Drop Bass at this party, introduced by Dave. And crazy times. I enjoyed it, traveling to America and New York as well. And went to a party in Alphabet City in a squat. That was pretty freaky.
It was pretty hairy then, wasn't it? Like, it's sort of cleaned up now. But I remember it back at the end of the 80s.
Yeah, you've done that. You've spent a lot of time there, Neil. Yeah,
I did back in the day, and I remember, Alphabet City, places like Lismar Lounge where G.G. Allen used to hang out.
Okay, nice. I want to go hang around that bastard.
Yeah, and the Hells Angels had their well, I don't know if you call it an office, but they'd all be down there.
When I was 19, I first went to Belfast. I wanted to check out what was going on in Northern Ireland, because I knew something was going on and we didn't know much about it. And I read a booklet about plastic bullets, so I went to Northern Ireland. I was shown around. I stayed in West Belfast, and I was shown around there by local people, and they really looked after me. I went to the Felons Club, and I was introduced to an ex-prisoner, an ex-IRA man, because they used to introduce people who wanted to know about what was going on. They would introduce them to ex-prisoners, and I sat on the table with a guy, lovely man. We had a drink together, and he said, "Who are you? What's your politics?" And I said, "Anarchist." And he said, "I used to say I was an anarchist." He said, "I now say I'm a Connollyite." So I'm sat there with an IRA guy talking, about, he'd done his time and all that, and but it was like an educational process. So I was very lucky to spend some time with him. And I went around all the barracks. I was shown around Belfast, and it was a real education for me. I was in Derry last year at the Bloody Sunday March. I'll be there this year. But that period of learning was really special to me, and I feel very lucky that I have met some interesting people. And I was friends with Jake Prescott from the Angry Brigade. I met Jake Prescott. We became friends, and I was able to sort of ask about the Angry Brigade. And there's a fetishism with violence, which is bullshit. People, rather than the deeds they did was to try to further people's movement. The idea was, it wasn't to fetishize violence; it was to kick things forward. And basically, I ended up looking deeply at anarchism and realizing how people fetishize violence. From that, I wrote a booklet called "No Comment: The Defendant's Guide to Arrest," and thousands were produced. And I've been given copies myself. Yeah, mate, read this. That's something I did because I saw people getting arrested. I saw people not prepared for riots, and I saw people going on anti-fascist things drunk and getting other people arrested. And so I've done my best to play a little role of trying to use experience for a positive, and some people aren't equipped to go on riots, and riots are fuck all if you've not got public support, and again, when we look at the poll tax riot, the left was saying how terrible it was at the time, and now the left are praising it because it's what got rid of Thatcher, and there's loads of histories that people are scared of talking about, and I think it's important that we do talk about them and document them. And some of us are in a lucky position because we don't have fear of the state or the authorities, so we can speak more clearly and openly, and what we're seeing now, like in Northern Ireland, Neil, you've got a new Republican movement because the younger people realising that they're getting shafted, and that they're getting coerced and they're not allowed to speak freely. And you see in rebellion, you try to suppress rebellion, it comes out. I am still interested in rebellion and the culture of it. And
do you think you've mellowed out, Brandon, or like?
I live a mellow life. I'm a really lucky guy, and I've just done a new record out, and it's called The Equality of Violence, and the title really is serious, and it's got a big anti-fascist symbol on the other side. And when we look at what's just happened in what Israel's doing, this stuff is important, and these issues that seem far away from us have a very direct impact on us. And so I'm still rebellious, Neil, as you are, as we all are, but I don't mind being caricatured, and I don't mind. To me, it's the Dadaist element that I don't mind playing with stuff like ACAB, and it's just play. And I'm becoming an angry older man, and I'm fortunate that I've known people like Dave Gordon, Jay Prescott, lots of wonderful people. People in Liverpool. I can't say names, but I'm a very lucky man. And rebellion is a beautiful thing, and it's not a negative. And at the end of the day, everything I enjoy is rebellion, be it underground resistance, be it Win Mertens, be it people pushing the boundaries in art and music and culture.
I know some of the music you actually do listen to. You always sending me quite emotional, quite like sad melodic sort of music. So I know you got a hidden soft part to you, Brandon. I know you like a secret arty farty, crying to some emotional music, so you hide it very well. But I know you've got that hidden behind the.
Thank you, Neil. I'm glad you do, man. Yeah, big soft fucker.
Yeah, you're a soft fucker at heart, even though you don't look it.
Yeah, I mean the period from the late 70s through to sort of like, for me, it was like 89 was mental. It was good, it was bad, it was extreme. Personally, I had an addiction and for a period, and it wasn't really, I wasn't cool. The parties, the squats, we squatted a school, we squatted a church, squatted a Rolls Royce factory. We did it all, it was a hell of a time to live through that period of sort of punk and the subculture and the drugs, the crazy scenarios. It was like one hell of a roller coaster. In a way, it would have been nice if it was someone else telling the story. Personally, for a lot of us, it was a difficult period as well, and we did all that crazy shit just to help us get through it. That was it. Creating our own way of dealing with what were going on, and trying to put a roof over our heads, squatting, scamming, frauds, everything we did to get by. It was one hell of a period, that period, and I think people are only unpacking it now. And there's so many books being written, etc., of that period. That's it, Neil.
Let's finish it there, maybe then for this one.
Yeah, nice one, Neil. Yeah.
All right, good speaking to you, Brandon.
Up the ra.